Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, again, wherever you're joining us, we just want to say thank you for walking with us. We have been, man, it's been so much fun. We've been moving through this book, Genesis, and we're only on chapter 14. Yeah, 14, because we are taking serious time to study. We're being responsible in how we approach Scripture. And so, wherever you're joining us from around the nation, we just thank you for taking time with us. And so, again, whether you're with family, with a church group, by yourself, wherever you are, we just want to say again, we think the Bible has so much beauty. There's so much here that can be applied. Only really in a powerful way if you do the research well, if you take time to understand, right? The deeper context, the authorship, all of that. That's what we do. All week long, we are studying and prepping to make sure we give you really good interpretations from a wide variety of different places. And so that's what we do. We'll dig into the original language, all of it. So before I do, though, someone asked me a really good question. And so I want to just take a few minutes and answer it because I think it's one that I think many people, as they're listening to kind of what we do here at Ethos, they'll ask, how do I do that? Right? Where can I find these resources? I also want to study this. And so I am very quick to answer these kind of questions. And I'm going to give you some really powerful tools today. I think that are going to be helpful. So the question was, what are some tools to help my group with the Hebrew? So this is a group from Colorado. They are studying together, and many of them have been asking, where do we find some of this Hebrew that Tony's bringing up? And so here's what I would do. There's three really good sources, and if you just look at the slide here, you'll see these three. First, a very simple app. And again, this doesn't make you an expert in Hebrew, by the way, right? If you want to really be an expert at Hebrew, you will study Hebrew in a university, right? That's what I ended up doing. I ended up studying Hebrew with professors, and we took time to understand the nuances. It was biblical Hebrew, so it took a little bit longer. So that's what we did. But understanding Hebrew today, finding some of the words, understanding some of the deeper pictures, doesn't really take much to find some of that information, though, because so many resources are available. So first one right there is an app. It's free. Everyone likes free, right? And so the app is called Accordance. And so if you take time, get on your phone, look up this app, whether it's Apple, Android, whatever you're using. Accordance is a great tool. And so when you use Accordance, you can actually go through, you can type in Genesis 14, and it'll give you the text, and then you can highlight various words. And these words, it'll give you some of the Greek or some of the Hebrew concepts to these words. And so you can use, and this also works with the Greek as well in the New Testament. But what this does is it'll give you an insight into some of what these words, the deeper meanings, as well as where else you found some of these words. So that's been a really helpful one. Now, if you look behind me, you'll see I have all these different books, right? These different sets of books. These are expensive books, and I've taken a long time to gather these books, but these books are what we call the Kumash. The Kumash. And the Kumash is basically Torah in a printed form. And so that sounds fancy, right? That's exciting. You read it again differently instead of this way. We read it backwards, left to right or right to left. And so again, when you get these books, if you don't know the Hebrew, it's a little confusing, but the Kumash is kind of neat because what it does is it has interpretations on the side. And so what you get there is you get a compilation of different interpreters, different rabbis all throughout history who give some really interesting context and texture to different words that they have grappled with over the centuries. And so as you read, you'll find, Genesis, chapter 13, there are 4 different rabbinical interpretations here of this one word. And so you can see how when I'm studying over this and many other people, when they study, there's so much to study because so many people have so many things to say about this beautiful, beautiful text. And then lastly, there's a website that I really enjoy using. It's very simple. One of my favorite rabbis is Rabbi Rashi, and he was a medieval, this was during the medieval era, and Rashi has just really in-depth interpretations, and that's why he's one of the most famous common interpreters of Torah. And so you can find his stuff at chabad.org. CHABAD.org. And when you go there, you type in Genesis, and you'll find there's a little tab, and you can have the Torah interpreted from Hebrew to English, which is kind of a cool way of, I think, one of the best interpretations of Torah. And then what you can also do is you can ask to see the interpretation. And so underneath various elements of the Torah, you'll see Rabbi Rashi will add his own interpretations that have been generations and generations that he's borrowing from. And so those three sources, if you just start there, what you'll find is one chapter in Torah will take you a week to study as a group. And you'll be so thrilled because sometimes you'll think, that's interesting. And other times, that's kind of weird. Where did that come from? Left field. Who knows? Yeah, you can disregard some of this too. But it's always good to have more information than less, especially when you approach an ancient text. So let's delve in. Today, again, we delve into Genesis. We remind everyone Torah was not a history book. It was a written compilation to ensure that Israel, who was taken captive 587 BC by the Babylonians, they are not writing Torah to keep a literal history of everything that happened. That's not why they do it. They did it because it was a written response to the fears of assimilation. They were worried that they were going to forget their values, their identity, their epic stories, right? Their prophetic warnings. We don't want to continue the same cycles, so we have to remember the cycles we're in. Yeah, it makes sense. And so that's what Torah was. And so when the rabbi would come out with Torah, these scrolls, the people would rejoice. This was a big deal. Torah was life, right? Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way, the truth, and the life is actually a reference back to Torah. And so when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I am what Torah looks like embodied, and so are you. We are walking around living, breathing Torahs, and we're to give life to the world, order, and identity. So good, right? That's what we do. That's who we are. I love this idea. So, again, Torah is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized through its tellings. Every time we find any interesting story in here, there's always a connection to who Israel is or isn't, or a warning. And once we do that, we learn to apply it. So we've met this individual, Abraham. And we've also met Lot. So Abraham, the founder, and Lot is this other familial individual who continues to, as they go together, they kind of begin to separate some. And so in chapter 14, this is an interesting chapter. I'm not going to read it word for word because there's just a lot of story involved. But I'm going to take you through some interesting points of chapter 14. And I would love for you to take time after this today, read over this story. It's one I think many of you have heard. So chapter 14 starts with this. Lot had settled in fruitful but wicked Sodom. Notice this, fruitful but wicked, right? How many times in our lives do we settle for things that we know on paper this looks good, but when I really think about my heart and my soul, maybe it's not the best thing for me. But so many of us, it says here, he settles. We settle, right? There's an interesting concept here. Lot knows the direction he should go. He's aware Abraham's over here and he's choosing to go this direction. But Lot says, no, I'm going to settle. It seems fruitful, even though I know it's wicked. It's not the best for me, but I will settle, right? And when we settle, there's bitterness, there's brokenness, there's pain. How many of us today, we settle because it's just easier? Settle. So Lot settles. Its inhabitants were the most ripe for vengeance of all the descendants of Canaan. Now, here's what you need to know about this. Sodom was an oppressive force. This was an oppressive empire. They were deeply political. They were deeply oppressive to various people and slaves, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, anyone they were keeping out. And they would oppress people with their physical laws. Freedoms were removed constantly. This was just part of what it meant to be a sodomite. Yeah, so Sodom has a deep history of abusing its power. removing the rights of citizens. The political powers of the day, the 10%, they had everything, while the rest of the country suffered and fought for what they had. Constant fights, murders, death, rape. This was part of what it meant to be in Sodom. Yeah, and when you think about Lot, Lot's part of that upper echelon, isn't he? So here we go. The invaders were from Chaldea and Persia. Then only small kingdoms. They took Lot among the rest and his goods. So notice this. These smaller empires at that time, they will grow, of course, but they come in, they jump in, and they basically take and riot and they loot. They see that Sodom is ripe for this, and then Lot becomes one of the individuals who is taken. So Lot gets into trouble because, again, let's face it, when we choose to abide in places we know are not good, we lose, right? We lose. And Lot is taken basically hostage. So I know many of you are thinking the same thing I am. When I think about those places I've chosen to abide, the places I know weren't good for me, I think this picture is interesting. We have friends like this, don't we? Yeah, there's deep rabbinical tradition here, interpretation, where it talks about Lot and this idea of friendship, connection, family. Lot could choose to abide with Abraham, but he doesn't. He chooses to abide with Sodom, Gomorrah. That's where he chooses to be. It's like a friendship, right? We have these friends who, again, you got the good one on this side and the one that you know is not good, but boy, they're fun to hang around with, right? The way they talk about people may not be the greatest, but it's kind of funny. But the truth of the matter is the friendships we have often will dictate the direction our lives move. And I think we've all done that before. We have some friends that when we hang out with them, we find ourselves doing the very same things they do. These toxic friendships. Lot chooses not to abide with Abraham. He abides with Sodom. And again, Lot abides with Sodom. And when you think about this, nations who abide with other warring nations, when you see a nation continuing to go back and forth with another empire that's equally as beastly, then you can only assume more and more beastly actions will follow. And this is what we see with Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. I found this one interesting. This was a quote from another interpretation of this text. Many an honest man fares the worse for his wicked neighbors. It is our wisdom to separate, or at least to distinguish ourselves from them. Right? We have to learn to separate. Wisdom would call us to separate from the Sodom and Gomorrah friends. 2 Corinthians 6:17 says, "Come out from them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch not unclean things, and I'll receive you." The idea here is not that this person's unclean, not that we're labeling people. The deeper idea here is there are some friendships, there are some connections that need to be severed. They are bringing you down. They're purposely toxic. They're continuing to lead you in places that are bringing brokenness and pain. Right? And those kind of relationships, the Sodom, the Gomorrah, that's what Israel was slowly learning to cut. Right? Cut ties with Egypt. Don't become another Egypt. Right? Don't own slaves. Don't become the nation that continues to trade with other nations for arms. Don't be an arms dealer. Don't build your temple on the back of slaves. Don't do these things. Don't acquire large amounts of wealth while your populace is struggling to eat. Yeah. Don't abide with the toxic nations. Don't abide with the toxic people. Don't become like them. Lot lives, abides with them. And the actions that come from this are that he and his family suffer. Everything he has is taken, and he is taken along with those goods and his family. They become hostages. And so what happens? Well, here's what happens. Abraham comes to the rescue. Right? Abraham shows up, and this is kind of a fun story. Abraham's like, that's my family. Right? That's my family. And so Abraham shows up. He is this knight in shining armor, right? Riding his camel. And this is what happens. And the fugitive came and he held Abram in the Hebrew, and he was living in the plain of Mamre and Amorite, the brother of Eshcol and the brother of Ammon. These names are interesting names. Use your app, but there's really not that much that we get from these names, and that's why I'm kind of moving a little bit with it. There's not a lot of tradition there. Who were Abram's confederates. And Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, and he armed his trained men, those born in his house, 318, and he pursued them until Dan. Again, you don't think about Abraham as like this Davidic kind of warrior, do you? But Abraham was, right? He was part of a nomadic tribe. To be in a nomadic tribe meant you were fighting tooth and nail, right? For everything you had. You were a great nation, and the founder, right? The founder comes to the rescue. The founder comes to the rescue. And he divided himself against them at night. So there's this interesting moment in the piece where he's going to divide his people at night. They're going to surround these Chaldeans. They're going to surround them, and they're going to take their family back. And so they do. And it says he and his servants smote them and pursued them until Hobah, which is to the left of Damascus, and he restored all the possessions, and also Lot, his brother, and his possessions he restored, and also the women and the people. Abraham shows up. Abraham, the one that has been abiding in the promise. The promise God said, I will count the number. You will count the number of people by the stars. Your nation's going to grow so much. Trust the promise. Trust the promise. Don't go abide in Sodom and Gomorrah. Trust the promise. It's going to happen. And so Abraham does. And Abraham shows up to rescue his family. He says, I will show up. Beautiful. I think this is kind of a cool concept. Family should do this for each other. And I know some of us, we don't have family that we're deeply connected with, but here's the beautiful thing. Community can be that family. Friendships can be that family too. How do you recognize real family? Well, when I read this piece, there's elements that stand out to me. I thought about friends and family. They stick together during the good times and the bad. Notice this. Abraham has walked with Lot in the good and the bad. He's walking with Lot this whole way. He hasn't given up on Lot. Even though they've kind of moved in their own cities, they're still family, and they don't give up, right? We don't give up on one another. Another thing, we make time for each other, right? I love this idea. Abraham's like, let me check my schedule. Maybe it'll work 2 weeks from now. We'll see how far they get away. No, he drops everything. He goes, he finds his family, right? We also, family moves us forward. Right? Abraham's there to remind Lot, look, we're moving in the wrong direction, buddy. Right? You've just lost everything again because you're abiding there. They move us forward. Another thing family can do is they give us hard truth. This was not easy for Lot to swallow, right? Being rescued by Abraham. After Lot chooses to go here, after the warning, Lot still goes. And yet Abraham doesn't stick his tongue out in him. He doesn't hold up his nose. No, he still shows up. He still shows up, even and gives him the hard truth, but he shows up. Next one, they love us. We're family, and we walk together. Number 6, we walk together. These different elements is what I find really interesting about this story. Abraham could easily have said, Lot, you're on your own. You chose your path. Good luck, dude. Right? But that's not what family does. And when you understand the deeper connections here, the north and the south, when you look at the north and the south, Israel was divided, right? Israel and Judah, they're divided. And yet there's this interesting moment that these ancient people were telling Israel, you are going to divide, you're going to break up. And when you do, you must remember, even though there are differences, you have to remember you're still family. You have to remember you're still family. There are other places you should be removing yourself from. Other nations, other values from other tribes you should be cutting off. But family, we're still family. We still stick together. We still look out for one another. That's what family does, north and south. So good. And the king of Sodom came out toward him after his return from smiting Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him to the valley of Shiva, which is the valley of the king. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was a priest of the Most High God, and he blessed him, and he said, Blessed be Abram to the Most High God, who possesses heavens and earth, and he blessed be the Most High God, who has delivered your adversaries into your hands, and he gave him a tithe from all. This is an interesting one. Sodom and Gomorrah, right? This is the king here. This is the guy that's really good at giving lip service, right? The king gives us lip service. He's saying this, but it's really all about appearance, isn't it? Because nothing really has changed. He hasn't decided, we've seen the error of our ways. We were weakened in our state. We need to begin taking care of our people. We need to change our ethic. We need to do all that. We should live life more like Abraham and his people. No, it's just a big grand show. It's what empires do. I like this quote. One of my favorite writers says, politicians like to say they're concerned about race and yet create policies that continue to divide. Religions like to say they are accepting until they're faced with real humanity. We like to say we're loving until our own self is threatened. We like to say a lot and do even less, even worse. Isn't that fascinating? We're really good at posturing. In this moment, this king, he's basically saying, I'm going to posture, I'm going to do this in front of everybody, but his actions don't change. Sodom and Gomorrah does not change. They don't become this thriving place of ethics and freedoms. No, they continued to remove them from their people. Their people struggled worse and worse and worse. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the souls and the possessions, take for yourself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I raise my hand to the Lord, the Most High God, who possesses heaven and earth, neither from a thread to a shoestrap, nor will I take from whatever is yours, that you should not say, I have made Abram wealthy, exclusive of what the lads ate, and the share of the men who went with me. Aner, Eshcol, and Mer, they shall take their share. Notice this, Abraham is offered all this wealth. Abraham's offered all this wealth, and yet, here's the thing, he refuses it. Why? Why would Abraham refuse all of the all of the booty, right? He basically has the pirate booty there at his hands. He can take all these things from the Chaldeans, these people who have hurt his family. Why doesn't he take them? Well, here's the thing. Abraham says, no. I am clinging to a deeper promise. God said he would cause my people to outnumber the stars. Right? I'm going to thrive. We are going to be a thriving people. And it's not going to be because of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not going to be because we're abiding in those places. No. Because those places, whatever you give me now, I know there's interest. And usually that kind of interest comes at a deep, deep cost, doesn't it? Usually my soul, right? My values, my ethics are at stake. Abraham says, no. Some gifts should be refused. Here's one rabbi says this, Our father Abraham chose not to accept the gift, not to align with powers of oppression, greed, and deceit. We as nations must learn the same. Here's an interesting picture here. Many people, I've seen them use this to say, see, here's a picture of Abraham refusing. No, this is actually a picture of hypocrisies. When he refused the gifts of Artaxerxes. And there's this interesting story about how the king of Persia, the enemy of the Greeks, he tries to persuade Hippocrates to take this money and basically say everything is good again. But he says, no, I won't take your money. I won't side with a beastly empire. And this is exactly what Abraham does. And so in some ways, this picture actually is very fitting for this moment with Abraham. Rather than take the easy promise, the easy gift, Abraham in this moment, chapter 14, he leans on God for the real promise. He leans on God for the real promise, I will make your people great. Rather than abiding in places that bring pain, brokenness, he says, I will abide with my God. I will abide with the promise. And so, what do we do? How do we take it home? One of the things I thought about when I was reading this was we need to create some separation from toxic people in toxic places. And this is not easy, is it? Because feelings get hurt, right? It's very difficult to have hard conversations. But as I thought about this, Lot really should have broken his ties with Sodom and Gomorrah after this. And next week you'll find he doesn't. He just hunkers down even more because it's a hard thing to do. And so here are a couple ideas. Number one, identify toxins. I think it's really important. The first step of getting rid of something is to recognize that thing is not good for me. That relationship's not good for me. This person is not really bringing me life. They're actually bringing me more pain, more drama, right? I hear all that gossip. It was fun to hear, but now I have all this stuff and I can't sleep at night. Recognize the toxin. Know when the individual or the person or the place or the organization is toxic. Number two, be firm. When you know it's toxic, when you understand the thing needs to be separated, it's so important that you take a firm stand. Look, I know it's necessary to create this distance. Having the difficult conversation, letting them know, look, I just need some space. I just need some space. Be firm about it. Be firm in your decision and be firm with them, which means you have to set boundaries. Number three. Sometimes you have to set boundaries. Sometimes going to the water hole at work, right? Sitting there by the coffee, talking about certain people. Maybe you just know I don't go there anymore, right? I don't go there anymore about certain things with people, right? I don't talk about this or this or this. I choose not to have this relationship with this person anymore, right? It's got to stay service because it always goes here and it gets ugly. You know what it is for you. You have to set those boundaries. Number four, sometimes we're too nice, right? Sometimes we need to be a little bit more assertive. And that's what I mean by that. Don't be mean, don't be ugly, but be a bit more assertive. We always want to please everybody, but when you do this, it hurts you and it breaks some of those boundaries. Oh, I guess, yeah, tell me about what happened. Tell me about that person. No. Right after you set the boundaries, don't be too nice. Again, it might be seeming harsh, but people tend to take advantage of people who don't set those strong boundaries. So you have to remind them, I'm in control of the boundaries I set, and you are stepping over the boundary. And then lastly, number five, after you've done this, after you've cut toxic people out of your lives, find positive ones. Look for the people who are always lifting others up. Look for the Abrahams, the ones abiding in the promise, the ones who are living life fully. Live with those people. Spend time with those people. Those are the people that will lift you up. Everyone, I had so much fun today. Chapter 14, it's kind of all over the place. Interesting, epic story, but there's really something deeply profound there when you take time to really delve in. Read chapter 14 on your own, and I would love to hear more from you of what you found. And please use some of those apps, the app, the website. If you have a couple extra bucks here and there, picking up one of those books, always so interesting. And speaking of finances, please consider going to ethos-church.org/donate. We spend so much time putting this information together, doing the filming, doing the edits. We spend so much time. And so please consider, if you would, donating to what we do here at Ethos. Walk with us in continuing to share these messages. We think there's so much beauty here, and we'd love for you to take these pieces, share them with others. Genesis is such a powerful book, and we think more and more people should read and have that accessible to them. And so your donations help us. Your tax-deductible donations help us. As always, we continue to work through Ethos studies. We meet online. We have great discussions. And subscribe. Hit that YouTube channel. Share that. We definitely want to keep growing this channel. So subscribe, share. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you will take time to abide in the things that bring life. And the things that don't, may you take time to cut those things as well. Everyone take care, and we'll see you next week.